Hi everyone, and welcome to tonight's episode of Book Bites. I'm joining you tonight from the lands of the Gadigal people of the Ku-ring-gai Nation, and I pay my respects to the custodians of this land. And I'm thrilled to be welcoming to Book Bites Dinuka McKenzie. Hi Dinuka, welcome.
Hey Sandy, how are you? It's so lovely to be here with you today. And I too am coming to you from beautiful Dawa country. And I do want to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. It's so lovely to be here today.
Now, tonight, Dinuka and I are going to be talking about crafting a compelling series. But before we do that, I'm going to share the details of the giveaway because otherwise I will forget later on in the stream. So if you ask a question or leave a comment, either tonight in the live series or up until midnight tomorrow night, if you are watching this back later, you will go in the draw to win a copy of Dinuka's fabulous book, Taken. And this is one you want to win. So make sure you do leave a comment or ask a question of us. So Dinuka, we've Taken, which has come out 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, 1st of Feb. So whatever that is now. Is that 3 weeks?
No, I lose track of time.
Whatever that is, it feels like a year. No.
We're delving back into the world of Detective Sergeant Kate Miles, and we pick up her story after The Torrent, which was your first novel, after she returns from maternity leave. Now, I wanted to ask you, when you wrote The Torrent, did you know that you were always going to write a series, or had you planned The Torrent to be a standalone?
I hadn't really thought that far ahead, to be perfectly honest. As you know, with my story for The Torrent, it was very much, because I didn't really have an ambition per se of writing, I very much fell into kind of that particular moment in time accidentally. And I started writing The Torrent and really kind of fell in love with the process. And then decided, that's what I wanted to do. But when I was writing The Torrent, I think it was more kind of just learning to write a book. You'd think after years of reading, I would have some idea, but it turns out I didn't. I had no idea. And so I would classify that very much as my apprenticeship book. And so, certainly when I was putting that first draft together, no, I probably, I hadn't thought that far ahead. But I would say that probably once I had a pretty good revision done, there was like a number of drafts in when, it certainly wasn't the final draft, but it was like the story was there. So it absolutely still needed a lot of polishing, a lot of editing, and a lot of kind of bringing it together. But the main story really didn't change after that point on. Once that was done, which was probably like sometime in 2018, I really felt like I knew exactly what Kate's, like where she would be mentally for the next book. So that was really my jumping off point then for Kate for the next book. So whilst I hadn't planned it, I went, okay, well, I really enjoyed doing this, so it would make sense to kind of do it again. And so at that point, I felt like I knew exactly where her mental health was, or what her thinking would be at that point. And so I had it opening into the second story then.
So once you got to that point and you realized that this could be a series, did you have like a stash of potential plot ideas running around in your head, or did you sort of see where the first one went before you decided what the second one would be about?
Oh no! So this one was actually finished, before The Torrent came out. So it was finished. I got the publishing deal for The Torrent, with the Banjo Prize, but there was, such a big gap between I think that happened in September 2020, and then The Torrent only came out in February 2022. And in that meantime, I was writing Taken. And so I'd finished it and submitted it to the publisher, I think around October 2021. So both of them were finished. And what I guess going back to your question, I guess I didn't have, as I said, because I had that jumping off point, I felt like I knew where Kate Okay, so for her, she'd had, with the events of the torrent, she had kind of a fairly traumatic set of circumstances in which her second bub comes into the world. So I thought, being the awful person that I am, well, that would make her quite jittery. What would be the thing that would really push her? How about a plot involving, an abduction of an infant that's the same age as her child? Seems like no fair thing to do. Yeah. And I did that classic thing where you're taught to do as, I guess, a new author or a new writer, I guess, is where you identify the vulnerabilities of your character and then you push that as far as you can possibly push that. And obviously, in terms of a crime fiction novel, you're really pushing that. Yeah. So that felt like an obvious kind of thing to take it. And then the seed of the idea was very much, I guess, my writing style is very much, I'm always looking at really kind of ordinary kind of circumstances and looking at kind of what darkness kind of lurks underneath that, like what masks we're all wearing and that kind of thing. So I am that awful person who's at a very normal kind of situation at a, school event or whatever. And I'm thinking about, what's, like say at a school assembly or whatever, I'm the one who's thinking, what unsafe situation are these people going home to? Or, that laughing couple over there, are they just having a good day? Or is this, like a respite from, something else that's quite unsafe and things like that. So in this case, I guess that seed of the idea, and for people who've read this book would know exactly what I'm talking about. The seed of the idea was very much a school pickup. Mm-hmm. And so I'm going to leave it there because otherwise it's massive spoilers. But school pickup was kind of the seed of the idea. And I went, okay, what would be underneath that? And that's kind of how then the idea kind of played out.
I think that's fabulous. And I've always said that I like to take ordinary people and put them into extraordinary situations. And because there's an awful lot of the extraordinary in the ordinary, I find.
Yes, absolutely. And I think, to be honest, Sandy, I've always remembered being at an author talk where you were the author, like I was sitting in the audience for you, and you were, I think, speaking to Anna at Anna's, one of her events when she had the Cronulla shop. And I remember you saying something like, I always try and find the hope in a situation. And I remember sitting in the audience going, oh, that's like the exact opposite of what I do. I try and find the darkness in all of the completely ordinary situation. And I kind of had a giggle inside my head at the time. But it's true, that's kind of where I go. That's where my mind goes to. And this was no different. I mean, so by the time I had done the torrent, though, what had happened was I did have this set of characters. So I felt like the torrent was very much like setting the chessboard, right? Like, here are all the characters. And then in the second one, I had the opportunity to go deeper with them. So certainly with Taken, I had the opportunity to go deeper with Kate's background. So because she's kind of half Sri Lankan, half Australian. So I got to go into her background. I definitely got to kind of delve further into her relationship with her dad, which I found really lovely. I kind of was, that is a really special relationship. I really enjoyed writing that for both books. And I just wanted the opportunity to kind of go into that story a bit more. So, this book allowed me that opportunity. And also to fill in some of the kind of the backstories, I guess, of some of the characters that show up in the torrent. And so it gave me the opportunity to do all of that while still kind of delving into a completely standalone mystery. So in that sense, both books can absolutely be read separately. They're both completely standalone mysteries, but obviously the overarching arcs of those characters, progress. Obviously, they don't stay exactly the same. They progress, and so their story is kind of explored more.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to come back to something you said in just a second. There's a comment here I just want to pop up that Tracy Anderson loves the idea of taking the everyday life and looking at what is underneath the surface, and whether that's the hope of me or the the darker side with you, because obviously we write very different genres. And I think a lot of writers would feel the same way. Just peeling back the curtains and the layers and.
Totally. And look, it always, to me, comes back to all of us as writers, whatever genre we're trying to write in, we are all trying to kind of process and work out why human beings are incredibly wonderful to each other and also incredibly awful to each other. Like that's essentially what we're all doing, right? Like at some point, to whatever spectrum we do that, like we're all kind of exploring that in our writing, I think. So yeah.
Now, you mentioned that when you got to the end of the torrent, you had it in your head where Taken would go and how are you going to, torture, I'm going to say, Kate that little bit more, right? And we do like
a fair description, yes.
We like to torture our characters. We can't torture people in real life, right? So we've got to do it through our fiction.
That's right, exactly.
But, do you then feel like, because and we'll come to future Kate stories a little bit later, do you feel like that you have to then keep upping that ante then each time? Like you're going to make her torture her even more in the next one?
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting point. And I am struggling with that, or not so much struggling, but certainly navigating that exact same issue right now. And I think what I will say is the second book was a very personal story to Kate in the sense that, because she was in a situation where she was a new mum, the investigating the case of a child going missing hit her really hard, like hit her really personally. So everything had a very, she was very kind of not unstable is probably not the right word, but unnerved at each point. She was on edge. That's probably a better way of saying it. She was on edge, at each point. So it felt like that ticking kind of bomb each time because it was so close to her heart and she was trying so hard to kind of bring that baby back to her family, because at each point she was thinking, how would I feel in this situation? There's a scene there where she's literally walking into, the mum's room in whilst the scene of crime officers are going through the room, and she basically thinks like, imagine if this was me, what would the scene of crime people find in my room, in my home, and like when you put yourself in that situation, you're suddenly like, oh God, and someone else is interpreting the detritus of your life, right, and going, oh, this is interesting, and this is, and kind of collating that information, against you in a way, so she feels this case very personally, and at the same time, whilst this case is going on, she's also back at work from maternity leave. So purely from just that professional point of view, she's just struggling both physically and mentally, and she feels stretched and she feels like she's not doing a good job at home, and she's, and then she's, kind of leaving a bit, early sometimes from work, and she gets the side eye, and she's, juggling kind of, over full breasts, and, so that physicality of early motherhood, as well as the mental load you take on when she's going back to a high pressure job, like all of that, puts her in a space where it is kind of almost all about her. Like it becomes quite personal in that sense, in terms of up in the ante. With the third book, I guess I'm kind of, it's more the story that's happening around her, so it's not as like super personal, but I think everything has to, like, each story is different obviously, and you have to build the tension in different ways, but I think I guess that's the beauty of series, where you can focus on different characters and kind of build tension in different ways, and sometimes this one was very Kate centered, may potentially the third one may not be as Kate centered.
Just from what you just said then, I really hope police never have to investigate a crime in my house and go through my things. I don't want to know what that's going to say about me.
I know, and please no one look at my what is it called, my search history. Good Lord, no thanks.
I don't write crime, and my search history is bad enough. I wouldn't want to think what yours is like.
Mine's pretty horrific, actually.
I'm just going to pop some comments up here now. We've got Gail Wood, who's piped in. She loves your energy, Dinuka, and your enthusiasm, and it definitely comes through in your characters. That's a really lovely comment. Thank you, Gail. Sharon has a question for you. She loved the torrent, and she's looking forward to reading Taken. How did you choose your characters' names?
I'm so hopeless for character names. Oh my god! And see, this happens because I'm not thinking of the audio version. And so, like for example, there's a Josh and there's a Jeff, and that only became a problem once it was already on audio. And I'm like, oh man, it sounds the same. And I'm not very good with that kind of stuff. So I do tend to choose, I guess, names that are. Like common, I would say, you know, because I want it to be, I don't want it to be jarring. You know, I don't want it to be like, oh, that's a, you know, like suddenly you're kind of pulled out of the story because you're suddenly concentrating on a character name that's a bit sort of that you haven't heard before or whatever. So so I try and keep it fairly normal. But for the third one, I have actually started a kind of like actually put the list down and put all the names down in columns to kind of work out if there's like too many you know, G's or, you know, and certainly, and so I've had to change a few things because suddenly everyone had a last name ending with M, and it was like, oh my gosh, so I had to like change that around, you know. And even in the torrent, I still had like Murchison and Miles, and so there's a few, you know, and I was like, oh no. So yes, so I mean, certainly in the copy edit stage, we go through this thing where, you know, suddenly it was like Jack and then Jackson, and then, you know, it was someone's last name was, you know, so it was like, no, we have to, that Jack needs to now become a Daniel, and, you know, like that kind of thing. So I'm actually not precious with names. In the end, it actually becomes sort of like, okay, what, you know, because I learned that lesson from the torrent to go, okay, I really need to think about audio versions and stuff. Those two characters I couldn't change because it's literally her husband and her partner at work. So I'm like, we're stuck with Jeff and Josh. I'm sorry. But everything else I've really tried to, you know, so it's hopefully not clashy. So yeah.
It's always fun picking names, I think.
Yeah.
I go through baby name lists.
Yes. Oh yeah, actually no, I do that too. Yes, that is a good way of doing it. Yes. And you can do like popular names in, you know, 1980 or whatever, you know, like
the year that they were born.
Yeah. So that's really helpful. Those lists are great. Yeah.
Tracy Anderson has a question. If you hadn't planned to be a writer before you were working on the torrent, what was it that made you decide to try?
Yeah, so that goes to the story of the torrent. So basically what happened there was, you know, I was essentially a new mum, you know, and I, you know, I was in that really overwhelming space of trying to kind of navigate my work life and my home life. And, you know, I really felt bits of me disappearing, you know, bits of my identity kind of disappearing. And all I was, well, not all I was, but, you know, like I very much felt that my identity was very much kind of mother, wife, employee. And I got to the point where I really wanted something else on the table. And you know, so it was a way to process all the big feelings as well as a way of escaping them. So I felt like, so, you know, of all the things I could possibly do, you know, I wasn't a good sportsman, or, you know, like there wasn't anything else that was kind of in the horizon, but I love to read. And so I felt like, you know, I could give that a go, and I started writing, and that was really a way that particularly the first version of the torrent, the first draft that was put down, was a very raw kind of like, here's me vomiting out everything, you know, and it was a leaching out of the poison as well as a way of escaping it, you know, into a world where I could control. And that in no way meant that I was now suddenly an author. That took years and years of learning and kind of revising, and a lot of help from, you know, very generous kind of writers, including Sandy, you know, who kind of gave me advice and read bits of the manuscript, read whole bits of the manuscript, you know, and kind of through that process, it finally became the thing that, you know, is now called the torrent. So yeah.
We've got a comment here from, and I'm sorry if I pronounce this wrong, Keirlin. It says hello from Port Macquarie, and she can't wait to see Dinuka speak in April. I'm assuming you're going up to Port in April.
Yes, I know. I still haven't advertised that, but yes, it's on my website, and it's definitely on the what's called the library website. So that I'm so looking forward to. That's going to be so much fun. Booked the accommodation, so we're definitely going. Can't wait. So obviously we're taking the opportunity to bring the kids and having a bit of a few days up in Port Macquarie. So that's going to be awesome. Cannot wait.
Nice.
Thank you.
And Leanne is the librarian up in Port Macquarie.
Yes,
and she's gorgeous. And for any of my readers who've read the Wattle Island Book Club, the librarian in that is based on Leanne in Port Macquarie.
Oh, okay. Because I've heard that story before, but I didn't realize it was based on Leanne. Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
Oh,
well, I shouldn't say based on. They have very different story arcs. Very different story arcs, but inspired by, shall I say.
Yes. Yeah.
And we've got a question here from Claire Van Ryn, who is also an author. And I haven't hit Claire yet, but I'm going to hit her up to appear on Book Bites. So there's fair warning, Claire. How much of you is in the torrent?
Well, I mean, I think when I was writing it, in my head, I was like, I thought it was being really clever and like disguising everything. But, you know, there's probably way more of me in there than is probably healthy, really. But, you know. You get that, but in saying that, you know, like obviously all of the crime stuff is not me, like, you know, but I would say certainly Kate's, you know, like the emotional stuff she's going through in terms of managing that work-life balance. I think that is a lot of the stuff that I was trying to process at the same time. So I think that part is very much true to character, but you know, obviously the crime stuff is different, and certainly. Like, so even though, I mean, I think it was like my family is also, you know, I got a husband and 2 kids, and so it was like shorthand to kind of have a girl and a boy, but at the same time, they're certainly not based on, you know, my kids. Like, so it's like, it's kind of shorthand, but it's also like, okay, it's also completely different to them. To me now, particularly after having written Taken, they are very much their own family, and they live in this weird Kate Miles universe that's in my brain. And me and, you know, my husband, we talk about it all the time, going, oh, she and Jeff are fighting again. And he's like, oh, okay. You know, like,
that's you and him?
Yeah. Well, no, because it's different. They have different issues, you know. Okay. And you know, like, you know, I mean, in the same way, I think Jeff is probably, there is certainly inspiration from my husband in the sense that Scott is very good with the kids. He's, you know, he had no issues with kind of, you know, helping out with you know, the kids and kind of taking on that responsibility. So in that sense, I wanted a character that felt completely normal for me to have a character in there that didn't kind of feel emasculated by the fact that, you know, he was looking after his own kids. Like, that didn't feel, you know, and so that was kind of like honoring people like Scott, who I knew, who are in my world, who were completely, you know, all in dads who were just like, you know, it didn't feel like this big chore for them. So certainly Jeff would be an honoring of that father, you know, that type of father. So yeah.
Yvonne has dropped in, and she loved the torrent, and she's got Taken on reserve at the library. Fantastic.
Fabulous. Thank you.
Now we've got the torrent, and then we've got Taken, and this is in the Kate Miles universe, as you just mentioned it. And I wanted to ask you what you think makes a compelling series that makes us, the reader, want to stay on a character's journey, or in that particular universe, you know, for books 3, books 4, book 12, book, you know, 25, if you get that far.
Yeah. Look, you know, I think there is a natural endpoint for series. I don't think you can stretch it out for too long. And you know, I think we all know of series that have been stretched for too long, where it becomes untenable for that many things to have happened to that one person's, you know, life, right? And particularly when you're talking about police, you know, I mean, and, you know, people obviously do, you know, a police officer would come in contact with more kind of extraordinary things than, say, a normal person, you know, like, you know, a non-police officer. And yet I still think that it's untenable to have constantly, going through these things. So I, in my opinion, I think there is a natural end, and I think authors need to work that out for themselves, for their own characters. So, I mean, the thing that always draws me to series characters is, I guess, that familiarity. So that what I guess, you are discovering the world through their eyes. And, when you read, I guess, the first version, the first in that series, I love detective series because you're essentially learning about the crime through their eyes, but you also get then, the detective's family, you get the detective's police family, and you get the detective's version of the town. So, so you get to explore quite a few things through that kind of detective going through their day-to-day, and I think so then people kind of fall in love with the setting, fall in love with that town, fall in love with those characters, and their vulnerabilities and their kind of compromises and their imperfections. And each time it's like coming back to a, like it's just coming back to this comfort thing. It's not always going to be like, they're not necessarily, what's the word? Like, it's not going to be a perfect world, but it's something, that there's a comforting side to that world, and to then continue to discovering something new in that world. So I think the trick for a person writing the series is, on the one hand, you have the advantage of kind of characters who are already there, and in a way, a setting that's already there. But I guess then the trick is to say something new about these characters that would keep, the readers continually invested in their story, because you're continually learning something new, but also like a new reader can kind of join the series at any point and still find those characters still compelling, and not have to know all of their backstory in order to go, this is still a compelling character. So I think that's a bit of a balance, because you don't just want, okay, well, this is only for the people who know everything about Kate, and I don't think that's fair to readers. I think the character just needs to be interesting, full stop. But there's obviously the Easter eggs and those minutiae, which long-term readers would kind of appreciate, and kind of have those Easter eggs for them to appreciate, to see how far the characters come. So, yeah.
So that leads me into my next question. Are there any pitfalls that you've discovered when it comes to writing a series that you wouldn't have to deal with if you were writing, completely standalone books?
Yeah, because I guess in a way, sometimes you think of kind of plot twists or things that you go, but I can't actually do that because I've already set it up back in book one this way, So that kind of, in a way, is a tiny bit of a limitation. Actually, I got away with it for these two books, because during the middle of the edits for the torrent, because as I said, I was writing Taken at the same time, right at the end, kind of like proof stages, I was like, actually in the torrent we now have to change the home ownership of this, because in Taken I've made it into this. And they're like, well, whatever, we don't care. Like, it's like it had nothing to do with anything. But for me, it was like really important, because I was like, no, but if that person owned that house, then they couldn't do it here, type thing. So I had that what's the word? I had the luxury, because I was literally editing both at the same time, or writing one and editing the other, that I could make those changes across the board. So that's good. But I think, once it's done, it's done, right? Like, so whatever mistakes or whatever kind of character things that you have, like boundaries you put on that character, you have to kind of stick with and kind of move with, so that it still makes sense for their character arc. You can't suddenly bring them an entirely new personality, you know what I mean? Even though you're like, that would have made so much better sense, because now this thing, it would work so much better if back in book one they had done X, but too late, now you got to work with what you've set up already. So I guess that's the pitfall. Yeah.
And if you did change things up, there would be a reader that would let you know, but back in book one, such and such happened, and now...
Exactly. How are they now living in Sydney? What's happening? Yes, exactly. So, yeah. So, I mean, I think, whatever rules. So that's the thing. Like, as I said, it's like, it is the Kate Kate Miles' universe, but you can't change the rules of that universe. However unrealistic those rules are. Do you know what I'm trying to say? Like, you know, like it's the same as the Marvel universe, right? You believe that they are superheroes, full stop. Like, so that is the mental leap you've made. You can't now change that into, oh no, now they're all real people. Like, that's the rules of that universe, and you've got to go with the rules of that universe. So I think that's the series rules. Like, this is the universe. Like, you can't, I mean, yeah, like I think that's kind of a cheating to kind of go, oh no, actually Kate is not that person's daughter at all. It's, you know, I think that would be a bit of a cop out, I think, you know, in yeah, the way I would think about it. Yeah.
Claire said, thank you for answering the question that she asked before. And yes, let's chat, Sandy. You might regret that, Claire. Dadi has dropped in. She's a little bit late. She will watch the replay. She's one of our regulars here on Book Bites. And Tracy has a comment that she hasn't read either of your books so far. Crime is not her usual genre, but she's very interested now in picking up the Kate stories after you've talked about it. And I can vouch for that, actually, Tracy, because crime is, as a reader, is not my go-to genre. I'm quite new to the crime genre, and it's because of my connections with other writers that I've started picking up their work and reading them. And I absolutely adore Kate and Kate's world. And I think part of that is because Kate is such a relatable character. You know, obviously I have absolutely no experience whatsoever of policing or crimes or anything like that. So if I was to read about, you know, the battle-hardened, grizzly old, you know, detective who's on his way out and breaks the rule, that has no appeal to me. But Kate, I totally understand Kate and relate to her, and therefore I really love your story. So yeah, Tracy, please do.
Oh, thank you, Sandy. That's so lovely to hear. And that's true. Like, it's because it is like the starting point, certainly for the Torrent, was very much like, well, you know, okay, you know, a person managing kind of parenthood and work, but what if that was a female police officer? What would that look like? You know, having to kind of manage that really full-on world, but then come home to kind of Duplo and Lego, and, you know, like how do you manage those two worlds? How do you kind of compartmentalize that in your head, and what strains does that place on the marriage? And, you know, for me, Kate's central tension in her character is very much, she's this highly competent person who's very good at her job and you know, absolutely loves her job, and she has worked very hard to get to the place where she is, right, in a profession that's not necessarily, you know, is male oriented, at least historically. So she's worked very hard to get where she is, and she's very proud of that. But then that's also the thing that puts her in danger, right, and then puts her in conflict with her family in terms of her family obligations. So it's that's always her tension, is like, she wants to do this thing that she's really good at, but at the same time, you know, her life is now you know, full of other obligations, and she has to learn to balance those things, and as we all do, find the compromises that work for our family as well as our individual needs, you know. So that's her central tension.
And anyone who is, I'm going to say mums, and it possibly applies to dads as well, but definitely it applies to mums. Anyone who is a mum will know that, you know, for me, certainly pre-being a mum, the risks I would take would be far greater than post becoming a mum. And so in a job like Kate's, and you handle that really well, that I guess that inner turmoil.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And certainly in Taken, I think she's pushed way more. She feels that she wants to, like, she pushes herself much harder, and I think, you know, the reader would recognize that she is making the wrong call at some times, and I really wanted to show how, you know, Jeff calls her out on it you know, in Taken, and I wanted to show that push and pull of a real relationship, because it takes work to build a relationship and to keep making it work, like, as your circumstances changes, you know. So I mean, in the Torrent, you know, they were in a pretty good place. I would say Jeff and Kate were were in a really good place. And in Taken, you know, it's far more kind of uneasy, and it's far more kind of fractured and a bit fraught. but they are working on that, and part of working on that is kind of having difficult conversations, right? And that's part of their growth as characters, and their growth as a couple, because now they've got the second child, and the second child is not as easy a feeder, and like there's issues, it's a bit more difficult, a bit more challenging, and so they have to work through some of those resentments and kind of build up frustrations where it wasn't as easy as when it was the first child, so that's part, in terms of, I guess, those overall kind of character arcs. You have to do what feels emotionally truthful for a couple and for a character at that kind of situation in their life, you know what I mean? So that's kind of, if you just go, oh no, they're just totally fine still, it would feel, it just wouldn't have the same, emotional impact or truth, really. So, and I think so people recognize that in themselves, and in their family, and in their friends, and in their relationships. So because they're all really relatable things. People making mistakes, compromising, having resentments, feeling resentful to their partner, all of that completely relatable. So so I just kind of wanted to kind of delve into all of that a bit more. So yeah.
Now I'm going to put you on the spot here, Dinuka, and it's live, so you can't back out. For any writers that are listening, do you have some top tips for writing a series?
Oh, okay. Well, for writing a series, I mean, I guess. Look, I mean, I think they are the things that we talked about. What I would say is I am not a fan of, series where, for example, like in the second season or whatever. I think this happens mostly in kind of TV series rather than necessarily books. But, like in the second series or whatever, like it feels like a complete reset for the character. So they've done this. So they've seen some horrific things in the past season, and they've done some horrific things. But suddenly it's all fine. Like they're totally physically and mentally completely capable of just taking on the next challenge and killing, 10 more people, and you know what I mean, and seeing more horrific things, and it's like a reset. And I think that is, I mean, so I guess depending on the type of series you're writing, like for me, I felt like I didn't want to do that for Kate. I felt like there had to be real proper consequences, both mentally and physically, of what she went through at the end of the torrent. And I didn't want to shy away from that. I didn't want to kind of deal with that in one paragraph. I think it would be completely, it felt to me obvious that she would be dealing with some level of PTSD, and that then would affect the way she performed at work, and how defensive she would be about certain things, and how kind of unwilling to see her own kind of weaknesses or her own kind of vulnerabilities, so there would be those consequences, I think. And so for me, I think I am not a fan of like resetting. So I think that would be like a top tip in that way. And I would say, I think essentially reinforcing what we were talking about, but you need to have kind of an overarching character arc for these characters that you've set up, but you just need to work out what feels emotionally true to them with whatever kind of plot decisions you're making in terms of, okay, well, like, I mean, obviously if I decided to do a second series of Kate kind of a year later, that maybe those issues wouldn't come to play as much, but because this was set like essentially 3 months or 4 months after the events of the torrent, I felt like I couldn't ignore that. So it depends on where you are with that. And I guess the other thing is with the characters, I guess you can't give, like, you do have to give the reader the opportunity to go back and read the other books. So you're giving enough information that obviously it makes sense for the second in the series, but you're not kind of, okay, and here's the plot of the whole first one, type thing. So that kind of thing, and as I said, I mean, I think whatever rules you have set up for your universe, you need to continue those rules. You can't suddenly break those rules. So, yeah.
And I think the point you made about resetting, you don't reset things from the first book to the second or the second to the third. comes back to how relatable your characters are, because that doesn't happen in real life, right? We don't go through a traumatic experience or a difficult experience and then 1 month later everything's cool and it never affects us again.
Yeah.
You know, even if we've dealt with it healthily, it's still there. It's part of you.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. And I think you can, it was an opportunity for Kate for that to be sort of the thing, her vulnerability that then affected all her decisions when she was making the decision about the second case. So, it felt obvious to me that would be the case, to do that. So again, as I said, like it really depends on, I guess, the timeline of the series. Like if you have numerous years in between, again, you could possibly get away with it a bit more with like, just like a page of, this is what happened, and you can kind of get away with it and move on. But I think, in my head at least, I think you're perfectly right with it's like 3 months away or even 10 years away. I think those fractures remain, those fractures absolutely remain, and those kind of traumas sit there in the background and they manifest in many different ways, so you can still draw on those things. And I think to completely ignore them and kind of do that full reset is a bit, it's a bit of a cop-out, I think. Yeah.
Now, I'm going to pop up the contact details for Dinuka, and we're going to wrap this up. So if anyone has any more questions, pop them in the chat right now. This is where you can find Dinuka, if I can get the right button on my computer here, where you can find her online. And while I'm waiting to see if, there is another question. I'll come to that in a minute, Gail, I promise. Now, I'm assuming that book number 3 in the Kate universe is in the works. Do you already know? Don't give us any spoilers, but do you already know what's going to happen to her in number 3?
So in very broad terms, I guess I took the opportunity in Taken to really kind of work on her relationship with her dad. Yep. And in the third one, I'm taking the opportunity to work on her relationship with her brother. So, in very broad terms, yeah, that's where it is. Yeah.
That's broad. Yeah, we don't need any more details than that. That's good. Thank you. All right. Gail has a question here. Are you a plotter, and is that more important when writing a series? That is a fantastic question, Gail. I wish I'd thought of it.
Oh, no. No. I mean, that's not very helpful at all, is it? No. Look, so I guess in the very broad sense of, okay, Taken was kind of trying to resolve her relationship with her dad a bit more, and then this third one, so in that sense, in a very broad plan, I would say, okay, if I had a broad plan, that would be the plan. But I am definitely not a detailed plotter. I find that I that actually really throws me and kind of really it makes me lose the interest in in the writing, because it's sort of like you're kind of discovering a little bit, like you're that classic thing of you want your characters to surprise you, and all of this is you, by the way. We talk about it in very esoteric terms, but obviously it is your brain doing that subconscious work and then plonking it into your conscious and going, look at this amazing thing that I thought of, and you're like, wow, I am so freaking clever, and it feels like you've done this magic, but it's just your brain like just being so immersed in the world. So that's fine. But so it is all you, but I still feel that to allow that to happen, like if you have created this really, certainly for me, I know this works for other writers obviously, but for me, like if you've written this really detailed thing and you're trying to pull the story constantly back to this detailed outline you've done, that kind of wrecks it for me. So in Taken, I actually did do that, and then I had to kind of stop, because obviously that was about 40K. Turned out that wasn't the story, and I had to kind of spend like a good 3 months kind of threading it and kind of knitting it back together, and that was painful. So I would never go back to kind of detailed planning. I did try it doesn't work. So I would call myself more like a scaffolder, where you have to have scaffolds like across the story. So I definitely need to know who the perpetrator is. kind of like probably the big reveal or the big twist. I probably need to know that. And I need to know the subplot. So for example, in this, I needed to know that, okay, Kate's dad was a subplot. I needed to have a story around that, so I knew the subplots in that sense. And the kind of the red herrings and all of that comes through all the revisions and the, editing, and you go back and put things and you seed things as you go. Some of it you're doing it as you go, and you look back and go, gee, I was clever to do that. And others you're like, okay, I just actually need to put something in there to make this thing make more sense, so it's a mixture of like the years you're working on a book type thing, that it all comes together. Like, it feels very formatted at the end, but it's such a messy process. So
writing is a messy process.
Yeah.
I don't think any writer would argue with that at all.
No, it's so messy.
It has been an absolute pleasure speaking with you tonight, Dinuka. Thank you so much for dropping into Book Bites. And if you haven't already got it, guys, I would urge you to go out and get your copy of Taken. And again, if you do, if you have left a comment or asked a question tonight, or if you're watching this back up until midnight on Friday, Sydney time, you can go into the draw to win your own copy of Taken. It's been a pleasure speaking with you as always. We've known each other for a few years now, and it's just such a pleasure to see you going from strength to strength, Dinuka. I always love chatting with you. And thank you to everybody for tuning in. In 2 weeks' time, I will have Emma Gray on Book Bites to talk about her fabulous novel, which I was very embarrassingly laughing out loud in public today when I was reading it. So,
well, that's a good recommendation.
Haven't bought. Laughing, crying.
Thank you so much, Sandy. I've so, I've just enjoyed this so much. And thank you for your friendship and all your advice over the years. And congratulations on your number 5 that's coming out soon. Far out, you are a machine.
I feel like a broken machine sometimes, and I need a good oil and a good refit, I think.
Yeah, right, okay. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in as well. I've really, this has been awesome. Thank you so much, Sandy.
And I should say, just before we end the live stream, if you are watching this back and you do have some questions for Dinuka, just pop them in the chat and we can pop in at any point between us and have a look and answer those questions if you do have questions watching this back later. Absolutely. Thanks, guys. See you next time.
Thank you. Thanks, Sandy. Thank you.